All right, everyone. Well, we are back, and we are very luckily joined by one of the lead MMA journalists in today's space, Mike Bohn. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining us. So, look, getting right into it, Mike, on the recent episode of Spinning Back Click, you looked into the judging of Holman Vieira and about some possible fixes to judging in MMA. We've had the opportunity to speak to fighters and coaches about this pretty extensively, as it's something we feel very strongly about. Do you feel, though, that there could be enough unity amongst fighters and the fan base to cause a definitive improvement and change in judging?
Man, I think it would take a lot, because ultimately what it comes down to, I think, is going to be the promotions and the commissions more so. Like, they're the ones that ultimately have the real power here. And as we've seen, man, like, I think, Luke Thomas, who obviously we all know, a dear colleague in the MMA media, has been talking about this for, I feel like, 10 years. And now some other people are starting to talk about it. Like, we have so many shows going on. The UFC is doing Dana White's Contender Series and, this Road to UFC thing going on in Singapore. Like, why not use these platforms where, especially the Singapore thing, you're your own commission in a sense, you're completely regulating yourself. Why not use that as like an experimental option to try things like open scoring or maybe different adjustments with the rules when it comes to like grounded knees or just all these things that go, even beyond, judging itself. That's something I'd love to see, but the UFC is so reluctant to even do anything like that it makes me feel not very optimistic about any progress towards change. I mean, these things are going to take a very long time. Look where we are now. I mean, they made that rule change as far as voting, and I think it was in 2017 for like having more 10-8 rounds and just opening things up, changing the scoring criteria a little bit. And every commission in the United States still hasn't even adopted that. We're here like 5 years later, like pre-COVID, when the UFC was going to a different city every weekend. It was like, oh, we're in this city. They're using, the new unified rules. This city, this state is using the new unified rules. Like, what are we even talking about? Like, fighters that go to a certain place, they don't know what rule set, what judging criteria they're fighting under. So, like, to think that we're going to have, some fan support or us just talking about it is going to make a huge change. I mean, I feel like I've been around long enough that it's hard to, I haven't seen enough evidence, things like that really make a shift.
100%. Mike, switching gears sort of onto your own career path, as a recognizable face of the MMA media and journalism scene now, can you talk to us about your introduction to the sport and how it started and what kind of led you to, getting involved in MMA media?
Yeah, I think like most of us, I was just a fan, really to start. But through there, came a passion, and I was going to school. It kind of lined up with as I was getting into university and what I wanted to do, and was trying to figure out what my path wanted to be, what kind of courses I wanted to take. And during that time, I started like a little blog website where I was just doing my own writing and, would post predictions of some of my friends and stuff like that. So it was all just like kind of for fun on the side. And then as I was looking for a path in school, I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll try taking a couple journalism courses here since I don't like have a minor or a major picked out. And then kind of just snowballed from there, honestly. Like, I had a friend design a little bigger website for me that was not just, your typical blog spot type of thing that anyone could go sign up for. And from there, I'd reach out to so many managers and fighters through like Twitter or whatever other space asking for interviews, and would, get one here or there, and just kind of slowly built off it. And then I actually moved from Vancouver to Toronto to finish my degree at formerly known as Ryerson. It's now Toronto Metropolitan University. And I was going to go there to finish my last year at that school for my journalism degree. And about a month before I was supposed to start classes, Dan Stupp, the former editor and founder of MMA Junkie, had reached out saying that they had an opening that they were looking for. And he had read a lot of my work as far as like the blog I'd done and the website, and thought I'd be a good fit for like a, low level introductory reporter that they were just looking to bring in and kind of groom. And it, took that job and bailed on my last year from school. And the rest is history, man. I mean, it's going to be 9 years, USA Today and MMA Junkie on August 1st. So
wow.
Yeah, wow. Well, and that sort of leads into our next question, which is, you just talked about how the partnership with MMA Junkie kind of came about, but what do you feel MMA Junkie offers that sets you apart from other MMA journalism associations?
I mean, I think undeniably it's in the name, kind of, junkie. Like we are, even pre-COVID, definitely, in the past few years, we're the only one who's covering not only UFC events, but we have a person on site almost every Bellator show. I mean, obviously you can't send people, to sometimes Paris or Japan or when they go international, but anything domestic, we have people at almost every PFL show. So I think we cover, all the organizations as much as we can and dedicate more resources to it than some of the competitors out there. Obviously, people do as good as they can. They have different size staff, different size, travel budgets, things like that. So I understand, I'm sure people would like to do things, but you have to allocate resources. It's a business as well on that side. But I do think we're trying, as fair as we can to be covering, everything and be the junkies, so to speak.
Yeah. Mike, as a journalist in MMA, someone like yourself who's so involved in the sport and knows so much about the sport and a fan as well, as a journalist in this game, is it difficult sometimes to see media that could be considered outside of the MMA scope covering big MMA events? I mean, I know I've seen some of Stephen A. Smith and, can say some things that sometimes just don't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I know a lot of other people. Is it difficult, especially in the Conor McGregor fight, when in a Conor McGregor fight, there's always, other media having their input. Can that be hard or difficult sometimes to listen to, or is that just kind of a part of the sport?
Yeah, I think it's part of it. I mean, it's a natural thing as it grows bigger. I mean, yes, would I love to see say a Conor McGregor fight, that platform, someone like a Mark Raimondi or, Ariel Helwani or Brett Okamoto getting that platform when we know you're going to put them up there and you're going to have them speak to potentially new fans, a much bigger audience. That's more widespread. Yes, you want to have the most educated person giving the most educated information, but that's just not the reality of how these things work. Like if we're talking about Stephen A. Smith, where they're paying that guy at ESPN like $10 million a year, they're going to use him at every possible turn, right? Because he's such a recognizable face, and things gravitate. So yeah, it can be frustrating at times too. I mean, I think but who knows, man? What people have their different perspectives. Like the whole controversy with Stephen A. Smith at that one time, or especially around the Conor fight, it was he basically said, "What, Cowboy quit?" Yeah, that was like the big headline and stuff. And here we are, like 2 years later, and Cowboy pretty much admitted on the record that he quit in that fight. Yeah. So like, shit, man, like it's hard to say. Like sometimes the way it goes. So. But yeah, I mean, obviously you want the best education possible, but things like this are going to bleed through time to time with just as the sport gets bigger. And I think in turn, that is a good thing in some ways.
Yep, for sure. So when we see what's happening in boxing right now with some of, I'd argue, the biggest fights in boxing, purely in regards to numbers and hype, involving people like Jake Paul, Anderson Silva, Logan Paul, and older Floyd Mayweather, do you think that is maybe going to foreshadow what could happen in MMA in, say, the next 10 years or so, where, we maybe do see something like the CM Punk experiment become more popular due to the name value of the athletes or the competitors?
It's hard to say, honestly. I mean, I guess it depends on what platform we're talking about. Like, as far as, is this going to be the UFC, or is it just going to be, if someone wants to get into it themselves and like set up their own kind of promotion where they can put a fight around themselves, like some, celebrity or person that has a lot of money. So I think it's possible, but I don't think it's going to be like super commonplace. I think it's just going to be the one-off every few years that you get that someone will trickle in and they'll do their thing. I think that's ultimately where it goes, just because I think mixed martial arts is so much more complicated than boxing to a degree, like if you're going to go and if you're looking at, competing full out. So anyone can, with money can go in there and go to find a high level boxing trainer and, do 4 hours a day or something and get like marginally good, right? Competent enough to go into a competition. It's a lot harder to do that if you have no skills and to go into MMA. If you're fighting someone who's like a complete mixed martial artist and you have to prepare yourself for every scenario. If you're fighting, say, another celebrity and you guys are going in there with the same amount of training and you just want to have a crapshoot, then sure. But to like actually make inroads, I think it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
Mike, what are the differences, which I'm sure I would imagine there would be, if any, in covering MMA, say in 2022 compared to 2013, 2014, before this the latest big boom in the UFC, pre-Zuffa kind of area? What's the biggest difference you've noticed in MMA over the last 10 or so years?
I mean, man, I think it's blown up in every way possible. Like, I think it would be hard to point here, like sit here and say what hasn't changed to a degree. You know? Like, it's night and day. I think obviously the one thing that stands out is just the volume of events. You know, like it is. I remember getting in, you know, like say, and even then, like in 2013, 14, the UFC was still doing a lot of shows. They were doing 30 plus shows a year. But like when I was just getting as a fan, say like 2006, 2007, they had what, you know, like 12 pay-per-view every month, and then maybe like a couple fight nights every second month or something like that. So it was a lot easier to follow in a sense. You had like, you know, as from the media side, you could look at a card a month and a half ahead and, you know, plot a big feature or do all this work to try to like go, you know, and prepare yourself and, you know, do all the build up for a fight. And now it's like almost impossible to do that. Just not only because there's a million fights in between then and now, but especially in the recent years, you don't even know which of these fights are going to happen. So like the amount of times I've written a feature or done a big interview and it's like, oh, let's hold it till fight week and publish it out. And then the fight gets canceled and you're like, cool, I just wasted like hours of my work. So yeah, I think that's what the biggest thing. And there's just so much events. It's so hard to look ahead and do all this stuff because, you know, especially in my position, you're just so focused on kind of the weekly grind and orientating your coverage around, you know, 1 week there's maybe one UFC event, but then the next week there's UFC, PFL, and Bellator all running shows on the same weekend. And it's like, okay, well, like it's almost overwhelming to a degree. So if you're a fan, there's never been, you know, more options, but as a reporter, there's also never been more work.
Yeah, for sure. So, Mike, kind of switching tacks back to, I guess, the fans of the sport. Do you think fans are too quick to write off a fighter who early in their career might suffer a loss or two? And, you know, the example I always like to go to is Max Holloway, who went 2-2 in his early UFC career, goes on to become one of, if not the greatest featherweight of all time. So do you think fans are too quick to write off a fighter who might suffer early losses?
100%. And I don't think that's just MMA fans. I think fans do this in every single sport, but we just see it a lot in MMA because, you know, especially the social media, you know, side of the sport can be very toxic. So you see the people that go and, you know, will crap on someone on their social media after they get knocked out or something like that. Like that kind of stuff I think happens in other sports too, but it's a lot less painful when, you know, you go and write on someone's wall that they lost a basketball game. Like it's not really, it doesn't quite hit as hard, but yeah, I mean, I think we see the examples over and over and over, and every fighter's situation is going to be different, right? Like a Max Holloway is a great example. Charles Oliveira is a perfect example. You know, there's this debate going on right now: is Charles Oliveira, you know, a better lightweight than Khabib and all that? And people compare, oh, well, he lost 8 times. It's like, well, man, like he joined the UFC when he was 20 years old, fighting, you know, guys. He's taken losses when he was 21, 22 against, you know, the Jim Millers of the world. And Khabib at that same point was in Dagestan fighting guys with like 2-10 records, you know, like all wins and losses aren't created equal in the sport. So I think you need to look at people individually. I mean, sometimes, yeah, you're right. Like you can see if you follow the sport long enough and closely enough, you can identify moments when someone is like, you know, it's just not coming together. I think, you know, someone we look at right now that's kind of interesting is like an Edmund Shabazian, right? Like 3 fights ago, this guy was going to be the next middleweight champion, the youngest champion in UFC history. And now like he's lost 3 in a row. No one cares about him, but he's still only 24, 25 years old or whatever, right? So like, we don't know what that guy's going to be. I think you can see that it probably is going to be tough for him to fulfill that ultimate potential. I mean, maybe he finds himself in a title fight one day, but he's not going to be this undefeated young wrecking ball type of thing. So maybe you taper expectations rather than writing them off completely. I think that's what maybe people need to be a little more fair about.
For sure. And that kind of leads into our next question, and bringing up Edmund Shabazian is a great example because we've often heard about the forgetfulness of fans, particularly in fighting. And it can be one of, in my opinion, one of the worst things about the fan base in our sport. Do you feel that the forgetfulness of fight fans is due to, you know, the UFC, Bellator, PFL 1, essentially hitting us with a new event of some kind nearly every single week? Or is it maybe an ingrained lack of appreciation for the sacrifice that fighters are physically making to put on a show for us fans?
It's definitely, I think, a combination of both. I mean, I think we're so desensitized as to it at this point that people don't, have respect for the individual story of each of these fighters. And I get it, like it's hard to, they all come in, wearing the exact same uniform. They're not allowed to really have much in the way of individual identity. The UFC doesn't go out of its way to promote and tell the stories of a lot of these people. And how can they when they're running a show with 24 to 30 fighters every single week? Like it's just not possible. I mean, we talk about it like they could do more, of course, but it's really tricky. And is it worth the return on investment and stuff? So there's a lot that goes into it. But I do think people definitely aren't appreciative of the journey and all that, but it's just the reality, man. Like there's so much going on that it's hard to, we just see the fight, you move on to the next one or the next event, and that fighter can go away for 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, a year, and we don't see them again. And then, people kind of, push them to the side. It's not like, say basketball or hockey or baseball, these sports that have, dozens to hundreds of games per year, where if you have, say 3 really bad games in a row, well, next week you can redeem yourself with 3 really good games in a row. You don't have to sit on it for months on end and have people keep bringing up that knockout highlight of you getting finished or like whatever the case may be. So I think just the limitation of competition availability has a lot to do with that too.
Mike, look, man, last question from us, because we really appreciate your time. Last question is, obviously, you've been covering the sport for nearing on a decade now. Is there a particular fighter in that time who in your years of covering the sport has far and beyond exceeded your expectations in terms of maybe ability, where the ceiling was for their career, just overall?
Ooh, man, that's tricky. I do think, you mentioned him earlier, and the one that kind of comes to mind is Max Holloway. Just as if you look at that start he had, he came in, he was 19 when he fought in the UFC, and he was a guy that, for me in particular, was really, really gracious with his time. I think we did an interview every single fight up until maybe when he lost the title to Volkanovski. So like that was a long, long stretch where it was like ritual before that. And just to kind of see his evolution physically, mentally, and him to turn into this absolute beast from, just the scrawny Hawaiian who was getting, mounted triangle choked by Dustin Poirier in his debut. It's just such a far cry, but man, like there's probably so many I'm forgetting about. It's hard to kind of put yourself like on the spot like that, think about it. And that's, part of the problem. There's just hundreds of fighters. Like I'm sure there's so many examples you could bring up. But yeah, like there's definitely a lot of cases, but yeah, Max Holloway is someone that I've, been kind of particularly close with my career. So his story kind of pops into my mind first.
Yep, for sure. Well, Mike, look, thank you so much for joining us today. We know that you're a busy man with all that you do to cover the sport. It's been a real privilege for us to talk to you as someone who's been able to enjoy your work when we've been fans of the sport. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully we can speak to you again in future.
Oh, dude, anytime. I'd love to come back on. It was great chatting with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Appreciate it, man.
Appreciate it, guys.